Um, okay, we're going to begin now. Welcome to the Jewish Study Center, to our class reflections on Pirkei Avot. And actually, I'll talk about that a little bit later. I'm Jerry Garfinkel. I'm the treasurer of the Study Center. And as such, I want to tell you that our classes are all free. We welcome people to come without paying anything, but we do have expenses. And so we are encouraging people to make donations. Go to our website, www.jewishstudycenter.org, and click on donate. And then you can donate by credit card, PayPal, or send a check. If you click that you want to send a check, you will get the address of where to send the check. Okay, so that's that. Now some technical points. I'm going to now enable the live transcript. So if you have problems hearing, or maybe you can't understand my accent or Joe's accent, you could see the transcript as we go on. Now, we do welcome people's, in fact, we more than welcome, we encourage people's comments and questions, but put it into the chat box and address it to everyone. Sometimes one of your comments might induce some other people's comments. At the end of the session, Joe will be giving a talk, and then at the end of his talk, I'll come back on and ask him some questions from the chat, maybe some other questions I might add myself, etc. So that's how we'll run things. So now it's, one further point. This session, as you probably notice, is being recorded. So when the session is over and when Zoom has processed it and I delete the part before the class, I will post it and I'll send an email to everyone who's registered on where to find the recording. So that's about the recording. I think that's all the technical points I need to make. So now I will do the introduction. And as you know, this is a class on reflections on Pirkei Avot, not just what my Rebbe taught me, but what I've learned otherwise. I mean, from Joe Rosenstein. And Joe is a retired mathematician. He worked for 48 years and is a kind of distinguished mathematics professor emeritus at Rutgers University. But besides his mathematics, he's been doing a lot of stuff on learning and teaching about Judaism. And in particular, he's written some prayer books. Or he's written this book, the Siddur Ratzon, which we use in my synagogue, and we use also for my daughter's bas mitzvah. And he, a year or two ago, he wrote a sort of follow-on, a Machsa Ein Ratzon. So you can get either one of them by going to his website, www.josephrosenstein.com, I think. He'll correct me if I'm wrong. But today's talk is about his newest book, which came out about 2, maybe 3 weeks ago, of reflections on Pirkei Avot. It's an amazing book. He talks about every part of Pirkei Avot. Pirkei Avot is a part of the Mishnah that has all these ethical teachings. And he talks about each teaching, but he also talks about, when that teaching was written, by whom it was written, why it was written, what it meant, what it means for today, how it relates to the other teachings. A lot of stuff in there that most books do not cover. So let me see, I think more people here yet. Okay. So now what I'll do is I will allow Joe to take over. And take it over, Joe. You're muted.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the introduction. You didn't mention that we were graduate students in mathematics at the same time at Cornell University way back in the 60s. So we've known each other for quite some time. So let me thank the Jewish Studies Center and Jerry for organizing this, for giving me the opportunity to talk with you this afternoon about my about Pirkei Avot and about my book on Pirkei Avot. And I thank you all for coming to this afternoon's program. Now, hundreds of books have been written about Pirkei Avot, commonly referred to as Ethics of the Fathers. And you might be wondering how my book is different from all of its predecessors. As we recently sang at the Seder, Ma nishtana ha-sefer hazeh mikol hasfarim. How is this book different from all other books? So I will answer that question, or try to answer that question momentarily, but I will start by placing Pirkei Avot in context. Let's see, I would like to just change this setting here, which I seem not to be able to do. Okay, how do I put the people who are at the top at the side? Is there some way of doing that?
I think you just put your pointer on there and move it.
I just put my pointer on there and move it. Let's see. That did not seem to work. Okay, no, that does not seem to work by itself. Okay, I'll stay with this then. Okay, so a small section of the Mishnah is called Avot. The Mishnah was compiled in about the year 200 of the Common Era by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, based on initial work that was done in previous generations, including by Rabbi Akiva, a name that we're more familiar with, and Rabbi Meir, and others. The Mishnah has 6 sections. As we sing in the Passover Seder, Echad Miyodea, who knows 1, when we come to who knows 6, the answer is 6 are the books of the Mishnah. 6 are the books of the Mishnah, and those books are divided into about 75 parts, of which one of them is Avot. So Avot is a very small part of the Mishnah. The focus of the Mishnah in general is on halacha, regulations for the new version of Judaism that was created by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and his followers after the destruction of the temple and the destruction of Jerusalem in the year 70 of the Common Era. Avot is the only portion of the Mishnah that has no halacha. It doesn't have any regulations. It doesn't have any history. Instead, it contains ethical teachings, advice to judges and would-be judges, advice to Torah scholars and would-be Torah scholars, and aphorisms which are addressed to the general population. The teachers cited in Avot span 500 years, from roughly 300 before the Common Era, which was around the time when Alexander the Great became Alexander the Great and conquered all of the territory, from 300 before the Common Era to 200 of the Common Era. So a 500-year period. Avot has 5 chapters containing the teachings of about 70 sages, presented approximately in chronological order. The later sages had to reconstruct from memory what the earlier sages had said, since obviously they could not interview them, and their teachings were likely not written down. Skip forward 1,000 years. About 1,000 years ago, maybe the year 900, we're not sure, the practice originated of studying one chapter of Avot on each Shabbat between Pesach and Shavuot, the period that we are in now. Now, Shabbat always occurs 6 times during that period. So a 6th chapter was needed, and it was added to Avot. The 6th chapter was not part of Avot, it was part of some other text. And it appears that that's when they started calling it Pirkei Avot, chapters of Avot. So I remember as a youngster studying Pirkei Avot on Shabbat afternoons in the spring with my Rebbe on his small porch. And every time I say that, I can visualize the small porch and the Rebbe and me. We went through Pirkei Avot, one Mishnah after another, as it is commonly studied, and as it is commonly presented in commentaries on Pirkei Avot. So in an hour or two on a Shabbat afternoon, we could study all of the teachings in one chapter of Pirkei Avot, maybe 15 Mishnayot, 15 paragraphs, or 20. So that was not a great challenge to study that in a few hours on a Shabbat afternoon. The title of my book is Reflections on Pirkei Avot, not just what my Rebbe taught me. So maybe you can see the text of this, even though to me it looks backward. Not just what my Rebbe taught me. And I will now discuss some of the ways in which the book goes beyond a brief discussion of each individual Mishnah. I should first say that my Rebbe, whose name was Rebbe Gedalia Cohen, may his memory be for a blessing, must have taught me well, because I internalized many of the teachings in Pirkei Avot. For example, the first time I went to Israel in the 60s, I had a discussion on a train with a rabbi who reprimanded me for my hippie-style appearance. Maybe I don't have that appearance anymore, maybe I do, but in any case, in those years, it was unusual, and he reprimanded me. I responded, Al tistakel b'kankan ela b'ma sheyesh bo, which means don't focus on the bottle, but what's inside it. You can't tell a book by its cover, or of a version of that. I don't remember how he responded, but I'm sure that he was taken aback by the fact that this hippie-like person could quote Pirkei Avot to him. On another occasion, an Orthodox colleague of mine gleefully informed me many years ago that the then president of Egypt, Gamal Nasser, had died, and I said to myself, isn't he aware that it says in Pirkei Avot, B'nefol oyevacha al tismach, when your enemy falls, do not rejoice? I also learned that Ein habayeshan lo made. One who is embarrassed to ask questions cannot learn. So I learned from Pirkei Avot that I should always ask questions. What does this mean? Why is this so? How do you justify this claim? Asking such questions has been fundamental in my approach to Judaism, as reflected in the Sidur and Machzor 8 Ratzon that Jerry showed you before, and also to my career in mathematics. Although I learned to ask questions from Pirkei Avot, there were many kinds of questions that my Rebbe did not discuss with me. For example, I mentioned a moment ago the statement that when your enemy falls, you should not rejoice. Why would Shmuel HaKatan have taught that? My sense is that such a warning comes about because people were behaving in exactly the way that was being described. Shmuel HaKatan's cautionary remark is actually a quote from Proverbs. He didn't add anything to it. So he must have felt some urgency in repeating a biblical verse. What was the urgency? What could the people have been rejoicing about in the years following the destruction of the temple and the destruction of Jerusalem, which is when Shmuel HaKatan lived? Well, it turns out that 9 years later, there was something to rejoice about. Vesuvius erupted and destroyed the great Roman city of Pompeii. Perhaps there was great rejoicing about that. Perhaps people might have joyfully proclaimed, "You destroyed our city, so God destroyed yours. Is that what actually happened? Was Shmuel HaKatan discouraging the glee of his comrades? I don't know, but I suspect that that's what happened. There are many other teachings where the context of the teaching may be relevant. A lot was happening during the 500 years of Avot. First, there was life under Persian rule, then life under Greek rule, then life under Roman rule. There were conflicts between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, about which I'll say more later, between the schools of Hillel and Shammai, and the rise of Christianity. There were the rebellions of the Maccabees, which was a successful rebellion, and of Bar Kokhba, which was highly unsuccessful. The greatest annihilation of Jews before the Holocaust took place in the wake of the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Yet to this day, it is not commemorated in any way. It was Tu B'Shvat the other day, and that sort of has some history, at least it's described as having some history relating to the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Perhaps not true, but nevertheless there is some history. But we don't commemorate the destruction that took place. We don't remember Hadrian in the same company as Haman and Hitler. Interesting. None of these historical happenings is mentioned in Pirkei Avot, nor perhaps in the entire Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and his followers and their descendants were focused on building a new Judaism and didn't want to be distracted by current events. In my book, I tried to present, at least to some extent, the historical context of the teachings in Pirkei Avot. I also try in my book to present the context in which I was writing, the epidemic with which we were all coping, and the political circumstances which plagued us. Very often the teachings that I was writing about were relevant to the circumstances of the day. So my discussion of Pirkei Avot also serves as a personal memoir of the 2+ years in which it was written. I would often ask myself, would I live long enough to finish this book? I was almost 80 years old and vulnerable to getting COVID. Thousands and thousands of people were dying. Would I live long enough to finish this book? The answer is in Pirkei Avot. Rabbi Tarfon says, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor. It's not your responsibility to finish the work. And he adds, Ve'en ata reshut yibatel mimena. But you're not permitted to walk away from it. So I persisted in working on this book and continued my efforts. One way my book is different is that I personalize many of the teachings in Pirkei Avot. That is, I describe what many verses have meant for me, like the verse I just mentioned. Or, for example, in response to the teaching that one should align one's will with God's will, I describe how I have tried to do that in my own life. While writing the book, I became very frustrated that my leg was not healing properly. And I responded by turning one of Ben Zoma's teachings into a mantra. Ben Zoma asked, among other teachings, who is wealthy? Ezahu Ashir. And he answered, Hasameach b'chalko, the person who is satisfied with what he has. So I repeated to myself, Sameach b'chalko, Sameach b'chalko, over and over. Don't focus on what's not working. Focus instead on your many blessings and be grateful for them. And so that eased my frustration and possibly my depression over my leg. By the way, Ben Zoma is the person who's responsible for the existence of the Passover Seder that we just celebrated. In the Haggadah, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who was the head of the Sanhedrin for a period, is quoted as saying, I never thought that we were supposed to recount the story of the Exodus at night until Ben Zoma explained the biblical command to tell the story, quote, all the days of your life, unquote, in the following way. The days of your life refers to daytime. All the days of your life refers to night as well. So if it wasn't for Ben Zoma, we wouldn't be having Seders at night. Three major developments took place in Judaism during the Mishnaic period. One was the development of the oral Torah, Torah Sheba'al Peh. A second was the adoption of the belief in Olam Haba, the world to come. And the third was the rise of rabbinic scholarship. Many Mishnayot in Pirkei Avot, Mishnayot is the plural of Mishnah, which is the name assigned not only to the entire work, but also to each individual paragraph in the Mishnah. So many of the Mishnayot in Pirkei Avot address each of these developments, but usually they are not considered side by side. It's not organized that way. It's organized chronologically, not thematically. That is, when we study Pirkei Avot the way we usually do, Mishnah by Mishnah in order, we don't look at the text broadly. We don't get to see the big picture. In my book, in addition to discussing each Mishnah individually, as is customary, I bring up at the same time all of the Mishnayot that address the same topic and compare them. Beyond that, I have included in the book 7 separate theme chapters, I call them, that collect together and discuss all of the Mishnayot that discuss a particular theme in Pirkei Avot. The first theme chapter deals with the oral Torah. The first chapter of Pirkei Avot itself explicitly claims that all practices of Judaism that are not in the written Torah is the Torah that's the scrolls that we carry around in our synagogues. The first chapter of Pirkei Avot claims that that all of our practices which are not in the written Torah were communicated orally to Moshe by God at Sinai and transmitted from the sages of one generation to the next without change over the next 1,000 years from Moshe all the way down to Hillel, who lived around the year 0. This claim about the oral Torah is examined in the first theme chapter. The next theme chapter deals with all references to Olam Haba, the world to come, and observes that a substantial change occurs between Hillel's first mention of Olam Haba and the compilation of the Mishnah 200 years later. For Hillel, Olam Haba seems to be a reward reserved for Torah scholars. But in the Mishnah itself, it says, Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek be'olam haba. Every Jew has a portion in the world to come. That quote is recited before we begin each new chapter of Pirkei Avot. And you might ask yourself why it's recited there. Or you could ask me about that later. The notion of Olam Haba, the world to come, in part provides an answer to the vexing problem of the suffering of the righteous in this world. What's the answer? The reward for their righteousness will come in the world to come. However, it's not clear that all of the teachers of Pirkei Avot are on board with Olam Haba, since some still refer to the this-worldly approach to this problem as described in Psalm 92, the Psalm for Shabbat. It says that the righteous will grow mighty like the cedars in Lebanon. And it says the wicked doers will perish like the grass. All of this is taking place in this world, not in the world to come. One of the sages in Pirkei Avot, Rabbi Yanai, says simply that we cannot explain why the evildoers thrive and the righteous suffer. Although the, quote, party line is that the righteous complete their suffering in this world so that in Olam Haba they will receive only rewards. Another theme chapter deals with rewards, which are mentioned many times in Pirkei Avot, implicitly or explicitly, but are not generally linked to Olam Haba. That is surprising, but it is also surprising that our rewards are mentioned so frequently, because in the third Mishnah of Avot, Antigonos says, "Do not be like servants who serve the master with the expectation of receiving an award, but be like servants who serve the master without any expectation of receiving an award, a reward." It appears that this sage advice by this sage for a person's relationship with God was rejected. If you study Pirkei Avot one Mishnah at a time, you might not even notice that rewards are mentioned 15 times in the 75 Mishnayot. It is also surprising that in Avot, although many Mishnayot deal with rewards, very few deal with punishments. And those punishments generally take place in this life. So, for example, if you were to ask, is Olam Haba like the Christian heaven? The answer is not really. And there is nothing remotely resembling in Avot the Christian hell. Another theme chapter addresses the importance of studying Torah. And still another chapter deals with balancing the study of Torah with earning a living and doing good deeds. In this period where the study of Torah had become of great importance and of great value, it was also important to remind budding Torah scholars that they had to earn a living and that they could not ignore the needs of others in their communities. Still another theme chapter deals with the ethics of the fathers. Not every Mishnah in Pirkei Avot is an ethical teaching, but many do have ethical content. While proceeding through the book, I highlighted the ethical principles that I found and then brought them together thematically and organized them thematically in a separate chapter. In keeping with the non-halachic character of Avot, many of the ethical principles are not presented as precise instructions, do this, do that, but rather as vague generalizations. What I tried to do is convert the teachings into imperative form. Do this, don't do that, so on. Since many teachings in Pirkei Avot are ambiguous, they have to be translated into multiple interpretations, into multiple imperatives. For example, one Mishnah says simply 6 words, im ein ish, hishtadel liot ish. Now the word ish means man, so obviously there's a gender issue here, problem with this teaching, but I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the problem, the question of what this means. Translating it literally means, if there is no ish, try to be an ish. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean that if there is no one else to complete a minyan, then you should complete the minyan? Or more broadly, does it mean that you should never say no to a request for assistance? Or does it mean that you should be a mensch, even if other people are acting inappropriately? Or does it mean in a place where no one is standing up for their convictions, you should stand up for yours? This teaching was very important to me when I was a young adult. It told me not to worry about what other people think, not to be discouraged when you stand alone. Because in this Mishnah, it says, if no one is a mensch, you should be a mensch. Here's another example. What is the meaning of the often cited teaching of Hillel, im eina nili mili, 5 words, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? Nowadays, we translate this phrase as calling upon each person to stand up for himself or herself, and as calling upon the Jewish people to stand up for themselves. So the imperative version of this statement would be an advocate for yourself. However, Maimonides understood this phrase completely differently. He understood it to be a call to develop your ethical qualities. So he would say this means if you don't develop your own ethical qualities, nobody else can do it for you. Still, other commentators took it to be not about ethics, but about education. And they would say, if you don't take responsibility for your education, who will? All of these are reasonable interpretations of this vague phrase of Hillel, im ena mili mili. One interesting question that you might ask, if you look at Avot globally, is why certain people are mentioned in Avot and others are not. Even though Antigonos' teaching is essentially ignored by those who came after him, he couldn't be left out of chapter 1 because he is a key chain in the link of tradition that proves that there is an oral Torah. But the editors didn't have to keep Rabbi Yanai, who basically denied Olam Haba. He doesn't appear anywhere else in the Mishnah, so nobody would have noticed if he were left out. On the other hand, Elisha ben Abuya is quoted in Avot, even though he lost his faith and was excommunicated. And he's never referred to by name, except here. When he is cited in the Talmud, he is usually cited as Acher, that other guy, without his name being mentioned. So why is he mentioned here with his actual name? Well, it must have been that Rabbi Meir, who I mentioned earlier, put his quote in, his teaching, and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who was the student of Rabbi Meir, felt that he couldn't take it out of respect for his teacher's teacher. The real puzzle, which I didn't realize all the times that I studied Avot, one Mishnah at a time, is why is Rabban Gamliel of Yavne missing from Avot? He is one of the 5 most important Jews of the first 2 centuries of the Common Era. The 5 are Hillel, Yochanan ben Zakkai, Gamliel, Akiva, and Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. Gamliel is the one who is most responsible for holding the Jewish people together during the troublesome period at the end of the 1st century. Why is he not quoted in Avot? So I propose an answer to this question in the book, and I think it may well be correct, but it's too long to explain here. So you'll have to look in the book. At the very beginning of my writing this book, perhaps even before I contemplated doing so, I studied Maimonides' commentary on Avot. And in some ways, my book is a commentary on Maimonides. Maimonides is very careful not to criticize the ancients, the ancient Jewish sages or the ancient Greek sages. Maimonides made a valiant effort to reconcile the Torah with Aristotle. However, but he won't criticize any of them. However, when he disagrees with what they say, he states his own view somewhere else. So it is not presented as a direct criticism of the teacher. For example, he does not challenge the idea presented in the 1st chapter of Pirkei Avot that the oral Torah is precisely what was given by God to Moses at Sinai and passed down from generation to generation. But elsewhere, he describes how the oral Torah was developed over time. Although he doesn't say this explicitly, he seems to be denying that the oral Torah is precisely what God told Moshe. My book at times is critical of Maimonides and at times of the text itself. Here's an important example. The Sadducees were the keepers of the temple, and they were the nobility of the Jewish people. They were called Sadukim. Sadducees is, of course, the anglicized version. Sadukim, because they were descendants of Sadok. Sadok was the first high priest in the temple that Solomon built. When the first temple was destroyed, those priests were out of business, but when the second temple was built in the time of Ezra, around then, they recalled the descendants of Tzadok to serve as the high priests. So the Tzaddukim had been around for a long time and had been the maintainers of Judaism. The Pharisees were an upstart group, in Hebrew, Perushim, which means those who separate themselves. The first chapter of Avot presents a revisionist view of history, that the Pharisees were the keepers of the oral Torah for 1,000 years, and the Sadducees were the upstarts, rather than the other way around. Surprisingly to me, Maimonides repeats this theory without comment. Chapter 1 of Avot is an example of the victors rewriting history from their own perspective. Since once the temple was destroyed, the Sadducees basically faded from the playing field. To summarize, my book looks not just at individual Mishnayot, but also takes a broader view and looks at collections of Mishnayot that deal with a shared topic, both in the discussion of the individual Mishnayot and also in these theme chapters. It provides some of the historical context in which the sages lived, and reflects the context in which I was writing. It shares how many of the teachings played out in my own life. It compiles and organizes the ethical principles in Pirkei Avot and presents them as imperative statements. And it provides a critique as well as a commentary on Pirkei Avot. It is also written in an informal conversational style, so that it reads like a dialogue between me and the reader, between me and you. Finally, it is also different from the other books of on Pirkei Avot, in that this is the only book on Pirkei Avot that was written by me. So I hope that you will take a closer look at it on my new website, which I put into the chat. It's joerosenstein.com. And that website contains many other things, including the Siddur and Machzor that Jerry mentioned, which are for sale. It also contains my mathematical writings, and it also contains a lot of Jewish things which I am not selling, but just posting there for you to download and read. It includes things from Limud to limericks. And so now it's time for questions, so I'll turn it back over to Jerry. I tried to keep it to 30 minutes, not quite. In doing so, I may have oversimplified things, in which case you can call me on it if you want. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. That was a great summary. I think it's incumbent upon me to convey what was in the chat. There's only a few things, but I'll do that. Then I'll go into some other things that I'd like to talk about. First of all, Paul Marcel pointed out you made an error when you said that Tu B'Shvat relates to the
yes.
the culprit. It was obviously like Ba'oma.
Guilty as charged. Yes.
I know. I saw a couple of mistakes, and that's what in the book also. A typo, a mind typo. Other things. One person, Anita Rosenfeld, asking, "Can imain ein limi li?" I don't.
Yes, I see it. I see. Can
Okay.
we take out of context? So I gave you two other interpretations of imain an li mili, and what Maimonides says is, that, for example, when he speaks of imain an li mili is referring to your ethical development. He says your ethical development can't be divorced from other people. You cannot become an ethical person if you are not dealing with other people. If you're a hermit, for example. So the second part of Hillel's Mishnah, which says imain an li mili, Vimani leatzmi ma'ani. If I'm only for myself, what am I? Maimonides interprets that to mean that your ethical principles have to carry over in your relationships with other people. And if you don't have other people to relate to, then your ethical principles are, just sort of vacuous. And if you don't carry out your ethical principles in your relationship to others, then your ethical principles are flawed. And and the last part says, lo achshav imatai, and if not now, when? Maimonides would say, yeah, that's right. You have to start being ethical now. You can't say, I'm going to be ethical when I'm 50. It doesn't work that way. You have to do it now. And those who speak of education say the same thing. Interpret the three parts of Hillel's statement also, and you can see very easily how it would work. So yes, so that's a good point.
Okay, one other point from the chat. There's other things in chat, including some very complimentary things about you, which you can read. One person asked, can we see the table of contents? I tried to scan table of contents while you were speaking, but somehow my computer doesn't work. So I have the Zoom on, and
so I can tell you.
I will put a PDF of the table of contents in the email I send out when the recording is ready, so people
okay,
can see
very
that.
good. But I can tell you what the table of contents is.
Yeah, but people want to see it, because
I understand. But let me just say, because it's important. I may have an important point to make. So the table of contents. First of all, it has the 6 chapters of Pirkei Avot in order, and all the Mishnayot are in order. So if you just want to see, go through in order, you can do it just easily. Then I have these theme chapters. Now, we had a number of people read the book beforehand and made suggestions. Some suggested I put all the theme chapters at the end, but I did not do that. As you can see here, the theme chapters are interspersed. So the reason for that is because the first theme chapter, which deals with the oral Torah, comes directly after the first chapter of Pirkei Avot, because that's where it belongs. The second theme chapter on Olam Haba comes directly after chapter 2, because that's where it belongs, and so on. So the theme chapters are dispersed among the ordinary chapters of Pirkei Avot. There are several digressions. One, a digression to Rabban Gamliel, which I mentioned earlier. Another digression is on David and Jonathan, who are mentioned in chapter 5. And so I have a digression to talk about the relationship between David and Jonathan. And there's a third digression, which is, how many is 10? So I tell you, you say 10 is that many. Well, what happens is, in the 5th chapter of Pirkei Avot, the first 7 Mishnayot, I think, each start out with the phrase, there were 10 of this, 10 of that, 10 of that. And the question is, did they mean 10 to mean exactly 10? Or was 10, did it mean approximately 10? And it's pretty clear that it's approximate. So I have those digressions. And then at the end of the book, I have several things at the end. One is I put a list of all the people who are quoted in Pirkei Avot, about 75, and where they appear. So you can sort of reverse search for someone's teachings. I say about 75 because some names, it was believed for a long time, were pseudonyms. So it's not sure that those were actual persons who were distinct from the people who were in Pirkei Avot. There's 2 people, one called Ben Bagbag and the other called Ben Hey. And that sounds like made-up names. And that was recognized thousands of years ago. Not thousands, but probably, but Maimonides saw that. And then at the end, there's something very interesting. Maimonides took Pirkei Avot very seriously. Not only does he have a commentary on Pirkei Avot, he has a commentary on all of the Mishnah, but for Pirkei Avot, he wrote something at the beginning, an introduction to Pirkei Avot, which is called Shmona Prakim, which means 8 chapters. And it's called 8 chapters because It has 8 chapters, and he talks basically about his philosophy of Judaism and his ethical perspective in Judaism. So I made a summary of those 8 chapters and put them at the end of the book. So that's sort of a rundown of the table of contents. It's you can look at the exact table of contents and see that, and see the numbers of the pages in there as well. So okay.
Anyway, I will send a copy of it in the email. One other thing that is in the chat, well, a number of things, but one thing, some people are asking whether you'll give a class on this. And I've talked to you, I've spoken to you once or twice that with the possibility of doing a class, but now since some people in the chat asked about it, I will ask you people in the chat, would you want a class on this? So when I send the email, I'll ask you, please respond if you'd like the class on it. Tell me, we'll see. So we have not made an arrangement yet. One complication is we did have a class on Pirkei Avot about 3 months ago. Very different way, very nice class, but very different perspective.
Yes.
So the possibility we may have it in the fall, but give me your comments about that. That would be very useful. I'm sorry, Joe, I didn't want to interrupt you.
Okay. No, I'm looking at just the last comment in the chat about the Mishnah 1.5. There's a Mishnah there which has various things in it, and one of the things that it says is that you should, and it's pointed out by Shoshana here, is that you should not converse excessively with a woman, and we recognize that in ancient times they had a very low opinion of women. Even Maimonides believed that women were not capable of learning, which is surprising because in the Talmud itself we have an example of Bruria, who's the wife of Rabbi Meir and the daughter of another scholar. So there certainly were examples of women who were Torah scholars, but clearly in ancient times they did not. It was somehow foreign to their understanding of how the world works, and I talk about that in the book. I certainly don't duck the question. It's obviously something that was objectionable, but it's interesting that that particular Mishnah, which is the 5th Mishnah, chapter 1, there's a teaching by the person who's cited there, and then there are 2 subsequent comments, each of which is more derogatory than the previous one. So, but historically, it's interesting to see that it had a development. But yes, certainly that's something which is unfortunate about Pirkei Avot, just as it is unfortunate that the Declaration of Independence says things which it didn't hold onto strictly. My great disappointment was to learn that Thomas Jefferson not only owned slaves, but regarded slaves as his primary source of income. Yes,
he had that income. I mean, he didn't start it. It was a process. He continued that process. But
no. He understood that growing slaves was his main source of income.
Oh.
That he would grow slaves and sell them. That brought in more money than any of his other products. So it was, so these guys were lived in a different world than we do, and we have to recognize that. And nevertheless, many of the things that they said, in fact, most of the things they said in Pirkei Avot, are strikingly wise in the sense that the people that they lived with and dealt with were not much different from the people that we live and deal with, and the way we should behave, they laid out in many ways, and they are very much applicable to our times. So the question is, what do you do with bad mishnayot or negative mishnayot which we recognize? And the answer is to point them out and say, that's not where we are.
Very interesting. As I've said to many people, I really love this book. Joe at one point mentions one of the Mishnahs, which says you have to basically be respectful of Jewish learning, which
Yes.
he is, but he has a comment somewhere in the book that since he's basically doing a critical analysis of the Mishnah, of the Pirkei Avot, and saying maybe this thing isn't really so great, maybe he doesn't have a place in the world to come. So I think you do, Joe, but I appreciated that comment you made in the book.
Well, a number of people have promised me that in the world to come they will vouch for me, even though I say things which may not be traditional, that they will vouch for me and say that I should get a place. Now, I wanted to point out there's one comment here which is quite apropos. Question that Tybal asks says, any comments on the Makot text that's read after each chapter? Now, so I mentioned earlier that before each chapter, we read the statement that Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek b'olam haba. Every Jew has a portion in the world to come. Exactly what that means that's another question. But we read that at the beginning of it, and at the end of each chapter, we read a comment which appears in as the person points out in Makot, which says that God gave us many commandments so that each person would be able to fulfill some of them. That's how I read it, okay? That we have so many commandments so that each person will be able to fulfill some of them. So it sort of recognizes that we can't all fulfill all of the commandments, that it's just a lot. And so God gave us many commandments so that each one of us would be able to fulfill some of them and become righteous through that. So now the question is, why are those two quotes at the beginning and the end of Pirkei Avot? Well, think of it this way. Someone in maybe the 9th century said, we read the Torah every Shabbat and on Monday and Thursday and on holidays, and we read from the prophets also in the Haftorah, and we read from the Psalms in the liturgy. What about the Talmud? Why don't we read anything from the Talmud? So that person had the bright idea to say, why don't we learn Pirkei Avot? Why don't we learn Avot? And particularly during the period between Pesach and Shavuot, we don't know the reason why, but so that's a very ingenious idea that this person had, and the idea caught on. But my feeling is that what happened was that when ordinary people started to read Pirkei Avot, they got scared, because the rewards in Pirkei Avot are almost all reserved for the Torah scholars. And people said, gee, this says that I don't get anything in the world to come. So how was that corrected? Somebody said, well, let's put before each chapter that every person has a reward in the world to come. And let's put at the end of each chapter that every person can be righteous by fulfilling some of God's commandments. So that would address the fear that people felt that Avot meant that they were locked out of the world to come. That's my solution. Now, I don't know whether it's correct. I can't vouch for it. It's possible that it could be verified, but I have not verified it. But in any case, that's my answer to Tybal's question and to the question which I raised earlier about that. I don't know whether there are other questions which I've missed. I don't know if you looked at the chat.
Questions are coming after your talk, actually. Most of them are sort of just,
okay. So now you have some questions you'd like to ask.
I have some comments and stuff. First of all, when you talked about the Hillel thing, the most famous saying of Hillel, which is in one of the Pirkei Avot Mishnahs, if I'm not for myself, who would be? If I'm for myself only, what use is that? And if not now, when? We all know about that one. I tried to actually use that. I'm going through some problems right now, but I'm thinking about that all the time. As I go along, I have to do things for myself. I can't just sort of say, other people are important, not me, but I have to also take in consideration other people also. So
That's
that's one of the teachings that has really come into me. I learned it many decades ago, but it's come to me more recently. Very important.
yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning of your talk that we know each other for a long time. We met first probably in September of 1962 when I first started graduate school in mathematics at Cornell. You were then a year older than me, but now you're 2 weeks younger than me.
Yeah.
I guess I've aged more quickly than you I'm glad you've lived long enough to finish the book until here. And since you're 2 weeks younger than me, I have also. So that's good. I actually, first time we met was in September of 62, but I knew you or of you years before that because you also were a year ahead of me in college. And in college, I remember you used to play about 20 people at one time in chess. My
Yes.
understanding is you were New York State chess champion,
Yeah.
and you would, play 10, 15, 20 people all at once. So you were well known in the college.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Before you knew me, I knew of you.
Uh-huh. I didn't remember that you went to Columbia as well.
Right.
Okay.
Well, you're ahead of me everywhere.
Yes. I see. Okay. Well, it's good. It's good. Yeah.
That's good.
Yes.
A lot of the things in your book are it's just so different, as you were mentioning before, like the different categories. I mean, I've, like you, almost like you, you have a very long history of learning Jewish things, Torah and Mishnah and all kinds of things, which is much longer than me. I don't say I'm the same as you, but I have learned things a little bit, especially when I lived in Richmond in an Orthodox synagogue. Every Saturday afternoon, we would learn Torah or learn Mishnah or whatever, but it wasn't quite as deep as you. So you have this very long history, but you actually learned a lot of things and take it in, and it's made part of you. I remember when we were in graduate school together, and you stayed with us for a few months one summer on Tu B'Shvat, not Tu B'Shvat, Tish B'Av, the saddest day in the Jewish calendar. You came out all in black. You had black pants, black shoes, black shirt, a black hat. I mean, you were showing how sad you were.
Yes.
And I have memories of that sort from many decades ago. And in the book, you talk about oral Torah, which I've heard of, for a long time. I didn't know where it came from. I know in the Mishnah, in the Pirkei Avot, they say it came from God to Moses, and then through a long chain of people to Hillel and basically to us. But you talk about where it probably came from. You talk about the question of God's omniscience, of him knowing what's going to happen, and where Maimonides got that from the culture, from the Islamic culture he was living in. I mean, you talk about these things which I've known about, but I didn't know where they came from or how they related to each other. So it's really nice. I as I've said a few times, I did enjoy the book.
Very good. I hope you continue to enjoy it.
I shall.
Yes.
I will, and I will get comments back from people about coming to a class. I expect we'll get a lot of positive comments.
Does anybody else have any questions? I don't know if I've gone through everything.
Well, maybe we don't have to have a class anymore. People know everything.
No. Let's see. Someone just posted something which says it was possibly relating to who is rich. So, Verena, could you explain that? What your question is?
I think what a person means probably is, and the Mishnah says, who is you?
Who is rich? That's what I.
Who is well.
That's what I cited. Yes, I cited that Mishnah Ezu Ashir, who is rich, who is wealthy, a person who is satisfied with what he or she has. Yes. Rachamana has a question. I see her hand up. You have to unmute yourself.
Just a minute. I'm now allowing people to unmute, so you
Okay.
can mute yourself.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. So one thing is I like to think, although I think it's unrealistic, that comment about don't listen to women or don't converse with women excessively. Maybe it's to say that the woman maybe picks up on it really fast. And so maybe it's saying to the men, don't keep reiterating yourself to the woman because she got it the first time. But that may not be actual. The other request is, I've been tracking Joe's talks as best I could, and I keep hearing this invitation to invite you to share why Gamliel was left out, Rabbi Gamliel. And so if there's time, I would like for you to offer with us that story.
You're muted, Joe.
The problem is that there were too many people involved in this happening, and to explain who all these people were and what happened to them and Rabbi Gamliel and subsequently it just does take too long. So let me simplify it in the following way: that although Rabbi Gamliel was a very very important figure in keeping the Jewish people together, he sometimes used methods which were too harsh. As a result, he was deposed by the Sanhedrin. He was head of the Sanhedrin, and he was deposed, which is an extraordinary thing. I mean, it's like a president being impeached and convicted. So he was deposed by the Sanhedrin. Someone else was put in his place, and but eventually they reconciled and they shared the head of the Sanhedrinship for a period of time. That would not be sufficient cause for him to be eliminated from here, but I sort of feel that that the same kind of harshness that he exhibited towards colleagues, he exhibited at home as well, so that his son, who perhaps compiled parts of the Avot, resented his father, didn't name his son after him. Instead, his son was called Rabbi Yehuda, and so there was personal animosity between the son and the father. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but at least it gives a plausible explanation for why he was left out. So I'll just leave it at that very quick summary. You can read much more about it in the book, or you can go online and find an account of this. He said that everything he did was for the benefit of the people, and that was served as sort of as an apology for his harshness. But he was apparently a very harsh man because of the way he treated his colleagues, and I assume that carried over into his family as well.
Thank you. Could you also share with everybody the options for bulk purchase that you shared with me?
Yes. So if people want to make bulk purchases, then that's certainly possible. You should get in touch with me, and I will make arrangements to send you a bunch of copies. Rahmane bought a box of 14 copies to distribute to her friends and other people who she thinks would be interested in this, for which I am very grateful, because one of the things I would like to do is at least recoup my investment in all of these books. I doubt that I will be paid very highly for all the time I spent with it, but that's not why I did it, obviously. But thank you very much, Rahmana.
Yeah, thank you. And so for myself, I'm gifting copies to all the rabbis that helped me identify with my Jewish motherline, and also to some people that I know through my father line, which was not Jewish, who are open to Judaism as a way to make any sense of the religion that they were given as children. And so a number of those are now ministers. And so I'm their resource for learning about the religion that was the soil on which their rabbi, i.e. Jesus, grew. And I feel like it's a way for people who don't want to completely change their whole life towards Judaism to learn the essence of the ethical teachings of Judaism in one volume that is so personable and easily readable. So I love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very, very, very moving. It kind of reminds me a little bit of what's his name, Senator Booker from New Jersey. Who's your senator, Joe?
Booker is one of them. The other
Yeah,
is
because he
Fernandez.
did a great deal of Jewish learning also, and he's a Christian. So one question came up recently: is provocative questioning on Pirkei Avot welcome by the tradition? Like
So
new interpretations like you're doing, is that welcome, or is that really something against tradition?
So I would guess that people who identify themselves as Orthodox, by and large, there will be exceptions, of course, by and large, would not want to read this book because it challenges, as you say, provocative questions about the text. So in general, Orthodoxy does not welcome provocative questioning. So I don't think I'm fighting it, but I am pushing towards new interpretations, and sometimes that is anathema. So I do have one of my 5 daughters is very Orthodox, and I gave her, of course, as I gave all of my daughters copies of this. I doubt that she would read it. She has 3 children who are all older, teenage and beyond, and I gave them individual copies, and maybe one will read some of it. I don't know, but it's sort of if you are Orthodox, then the word Orthodox means correct teaching, and this is not a correct teaching. So so the audience is more of this book is more or less limited to Jews who love Judaism and love to learn about Judaism, and but are not Orthodox. And so so I'm not sure that I will be able to sell as many copies as I've made. I should mention that, since Jerry raised the issue before, when Pirkei Avot talks about learning Torah, it has 2 audiences in mind. One audience is those who are going to be scholars of the Torah, and many of the Mishnayot in Avot address them. But then it also has the idea that every person, no matter whether they have any aspirations to be a scholar or not, should study Torah. And one of the Mishnayot says, Aseh Toratcha Keva, that it's very important that each person should make their study of Torah at a fixed time. And that's a very important teaching that we know, for example, people who want to exercise, if you want to exercise regularly, you have to have a fixed time for doing it. If you want to be in a book club, you have to have a fixed agenda there. And in the rest of our lives, we arrange our lives with a certain schedule. And so they had in mind that every person should schedule some point in their week or day for studying Torah. Obviously, they would prefer it be a greater amount of time than a lesser amount of time. But there's a very adamant perspective that each person should study Torah. In my life, I've tried to do that. I've had study partners. Now, that's an interesting issue that comes up in Pirkei Avot as well, that if you want to learn Torah, then it's best that you have a partner to study with, to learn with. I know that many people who walk as exercise have a walking partner. Obviously, if you play tennis, you have to have someone you play tennis with. But having someone you study with is also very important.
Yeah,
One of my grandsons complained to me, called me up to wish me a good Shabbos yesterday. He's in the yeshiva somewhere in South Jersey, and he was upset that his study partner, he lost his study partner for one of his classes because someone else had lost a study partner, and they felt that he needed a study partner more than my grandson did. So he was very upset about that. But in my own life, I have, since my days at Cornell, had study partners almost all the years since then, 50 years. I've had one or two study partners at a time, get together once a week and learn something together. And I've never had any, or not very much, formal Jewish training. I'm not a rabbi, but that's something that's been an important part of my life, and that's reflected in this statement in Pirkei Avot, Aseh Torah Tchakeva. You should set aside some specific time for studying Torah. So those of you who purchase my book can use give it 15 minutes a day, and that will be your Torah study for the day.
I noticed another part, another mission that I'm learning from your book, of course, that besides studying, fixed time for studying, there's discussion about how you find a Torah partner, a study partner.
Yes. That's it. So it's very interesting that the one teaching is Aseh lecha Rav, find yourself a mentor. And the mentor you can find easily because that's somebody who knows more than you do. And the mentor, part of their responsibility is to help you. But then it says, Knei lecha chaver, purchase for yourself a chaver. And that's the same term that's used in finding a spouse, that somehow the notion of finding a person finding a study partner is somehow related, equivalent to the importance of finding the right person to have as your partner, as your life partner, is to have a good study partner. So it's very interesting. Now I see that someone points out that Pirkei Avot, another statement of Ben Zoma, is who is wise, Ezahu Chacham Halomed Mikol Adam, someone who learns from everyone. And that's a very important teaching as well, that the sources of knowledge are very broad. And he probably meant that it was okay to learn from Greek texts, for example. So Rabban Gamliel, for example, did in fact teach his children Greek, and he thought it was important for them to know. Now, by then, the Greek Empire had faded before the Roman Empire, so maybe he didn't have them learn Latin, but he did have them learn Greek. And it is important to learn from everyone. Myself, much of what is in my book arose from questions that people asked in a course that I gave over a 3-year period in Pirkei Avot. We started about 6 months before the COVID outbreak. We started learning every Shabbat Pirkei Avot, and it took us close to 3 years to finish. So when you talk about a course for the fall, you have to be careful what you ask me to do, because it may be a very long course. But in fact, I learned a great deal from the people who I was, quote, teaching, because people ask questions. And when people ask questions, then you have to think about something. And when you think about something, then you can come up with very interesting understandings. I see the term flexodoxy. I have not heard that before, but that's a very interesting idea. That I guess what it means is that the teachings, that there is no correct set of teachings, but that the set of teachings which one should adhere to should be somehow more broad and more flexible. Interesting. Okay.
Let me comment a little bit about what you said about long course. Our president of the Jewish Studies Center, not of the country, is Amy Schwartz. So she'd make a good president of the country also, I think. She has been teaching, well, before the pandemic at least, courses on the Psalms.
Yes.
And been teaching that for years. Now, there's more Psalms, I think, than there are Mishnahs in the Pirkei Avot, but, you know, you can go on if you want to start teaching classes. We could have a few classes now, a few classes then. We have plenty of space for that.
No, that's something to discuss, actually.
I'm just coming out of the top of my head and stuff. But,
yes.
And the other thing I would comment about your talk about orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is one of the branches or streams, if you want, of movements of Judaism. But orthodoxy is broad also. It goes from
absolutely.
Chassidim and Haredim and to modern Orthodox, to open Orthodox. So I think there are many Orthodox people who would love to read the book.
I'm sure you're right. I don't know how they will get a hold of it, but I'm sure that there are some who would. I don't know if there's many. I don't know what percentage. My impression is that those who well, whatever, I'll just leave it at that. So I did say at the very outset that most Orthodox people would not look at this, but there certainly are some who would, and I hope that they will and share their comments with me, because I am, I'm open to having discussions. And let's see. Okay, is there anything else that in the chat that I talk about? Does anybody want to raise their hand and say something else?
And if anyone would like to raise their hand, if they want to ask a question in person, that would be fine. But raise your hand by pushing the raise hand in the reactions part of the screen, on the bottom of the screen. Okay, I think we'll finish now. Again, thank you very much, Joe. And I will be writing an email after the recording is ready, and I'll put in the table of contents and the questions about how, whether you want a class, maybe you might. I'll word it in a way also that maybe which way you want the class, etc. So we'll do that as a follow-on. I will say to people also, this coming Wednesday, we have a class about Introduction to Kabbalah. Jay McCrensky is teaching that, and he's written 2 books about Kabbalah. He has a PhD in, I think, Kabbalah, or something like that. Very nice fellow, and many of us don't know much about Kabbalah. Okay, so thank you, Joe, and thank you all for watching, listening, and asking questions. And I think I'm going to close up right now.
Tybal has a question there.
Tybal.
If I may.
I know you by other names, but okay.
Well, like Jews, I have many names.
Anyway,
just a question, sorry that occurred to me late. because and this is not the first time, between Pesach and Shavuos for a specific purpose, I'm studying a chapter each Shabbos afternoon. But I wondered, given that it seems to me clearly, as you've been doing this, you don't save it for the 6 weeks. Is there something that you do that's different in your Pirkei Avot study between Pesach and Shavuos that you somehow make a change in the study to mark that custom or not?
So I would say that using my book for a 6-week, breaking it up into 6 parts according to the 6 chapters, you wouldn't be able to study a chapter in 1 or 2 hours. There's just too much there. So it would be, in other words, if you wanted to organize a group of people to get together every Shabbat between Pesach and Shavuot and read it together, that would probably not work. There would be not enough time. But it would be appropriate if each person read the chapter before the Shabbat, and then they came together on Shabbat and discussed the issues that they thought were the most important. Because there's just too many pages. It's just yes. So
Joe,
I'm not sure I'm answering your question.
No, I meant you personally, not how to use the book, but as
Oh.
someone who clearly didn't reserve your study just for 6 weeks,
Yes.
when it was the 6 weeks, when it's extra significant to study, if you personally made a change in how you studied it.
No.
Remember that Joe's been studying this thing for many, many decades.
Yeah. Well, I certainly, yes, I don't know, many decades, but certainly for a number of years. So I felt that I have fulfilled my obligation for this year by publishing the book. So, and I'm reading it through again because people are still asking me questions. Jerry sent me 20 comments, or about 20 comments yesterday. Last night, both comments and typos and questions. And so I'm reading the whole thing through again because I need to do that to address things that come up. And also, I am in the middle of, as I said before, 3 Chavruta partnerships that meet every week. And somehow, whatever we're learning has raises some issue with Pirkei Avot. So I have a whole list of my own changes that I would want to make. So I'm sort of reading Pirkei Avot all the time. So I've not been reading it on Shabbat afternoons. Although next Shabbat afternoon, one of my grandsons says that he's going to come and learn Pirkei Avot with me. So we'll see what happens with that. How he responds to my comments. But actually, he has come and we study. We usually, when he's home from the yeshiva, he comes over on Shabbat afternoon, and we study the portion of Talmud which he's been studying that week. So so he's willing to learn with me. He's Orthodox, but he's willing to learn with me. I'm very pleased with that. So the answer to your question, I've not been doing it one chapter a week. I've been doing it just going through the book and finding all sorts of new things which I found before. Interestingly enough, one question is whether I'm finished with this book. So I know very well that there are many more things that I could have done, that I could have included in the book, that I should have researched more and so on. But I'm also quite aware of the aphorism which goes, the perfect is the enemy of the good. And I could have kept working on this forever and never published anything, and that would have been a loss. So I published this now, and I keep finding new things that I would like to add. So the book is not, even though I'm done with the book is not done with me. It keeps telling me that, hey, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. What about this? What about that? So I'm still very much immersed in this book. So thank you very much.
The siddur that we have of yours, I
Yes,
believe this is the second version of the same siddur. You published an earlier version, then you published this
yes,
later.
yes. So that Siddur went through a number of different versions and a number of printings as well. And there too, I had over time developed new things to add and new things to address. So this is what I do. So
Very, very good. Years ago, I was trying to learn some new mathematics, that area I didn't know. I tried to get a study partner, but I couldn't find one, so I never really did learn it.
Yeah.
What it was, maybe KS3.
That's
I'm not
right.
sure what it was.
it is very hard to learn anything without a study partner. That somehow you learn from other people. So this is what Ezu Ashir, Ezu Chacham, Alomed Mikol Adam, who is wise, he who learns from everybody, that he has an opportunity to learn from. And the more people you have an opportunity to learn from, the better your chances are of becoming wise. Okay.
I worked for about 30 some years, 40 some years, I guess, for the U.S. Army as a civilian, and I learned a lot. I mean, I learned I learned all kinds of things. I'm not a military person at all, but you learn from them, from everybody. I learned from my children. I learned from everybody.
Right.
Okay.
So a person, so the Pirkei Avot, certainly the statement in Pirkei Avot certainly says that you should be open to learn from everybody, and it quotes a verse from Psalms that David wrote that he said, "Kol malam dai hiskalti." I learned from all of the people who had things to teach me. So the idea that one should learn from everybody and be open to learning is a very important principle in this area.
Okay, it is now 3:30. I think I will close this up. Again, you will get an email from me 1 or 2 days later, and then we'll see a follow-up. Okay.
Very good. Thank you very much. Could you send me a copy of the chat?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.